Oh, hi! You're not a mimosa cupcake.
I am a mimosa cupcake.
Oh, congratulations.
Can we all be mimosa cupcakes?
But
Yes.
what if I don't want... Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I'll be
I
a
mean,
mimosa cupcake.
I mean, only some of them are mimosa cupcakes. Some of them are non-mimosa cupcakes.
Are some of them convertible to mimosa cupcakes? Because I saw that you brought a container.
Yes.
Of-
Yeah, that's why some of them are. Because it didn't taste like orange at all. It tastes like.
I mean, you say it tastes like honey, and I have zero issues
Well,
with
yeah,
that.
but that's not
I should post
mimosa.
the stream.
Yeah, I should too.
Give me
Oh
a
my
second.
goodness,
What
we're
do we-
forgetting all
Hosting
the
the
things.
stream. I
Oh,
tweeted out
oh.
about it, but I didn't host it.
See, I haven't even done that.
Ha! I have won.
Goodness sakes, right in my ear. All right.
You told me to speak up.
You've won. You were here before me
Was.
with
That's
less to do.
That's true.
Let's see if I can find
And I
you.
had grocery store sushi, so if I need to
Ooh.
excuse myself for a minute, y'all know why.
I'm sure grocery store sushi is super healthy.
The funny thing about that is I saw the sushi and I was like, oh, I wonder where she got that. I want it.
It actually was pretty
I would
good.
love having a good place to get sushi.
It was...
Host,
All right, where do I find it?
Host channel.
Okay,
Are
so...
you in the app?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna
Go to the channel.
Oh, that's me.
your chat, and
Excellent.
then you...
Okay, that works too.
Wait, is there another way to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, you go
Oh, we're
to
just
the
learning all the
channel.
things.
See? Now
Yeah.
who's the teacher?
Streaming senpai, help me!
Wait, that's Discord. Hang on, bear with me.
Host.
Bear with me.
So I go to the channel.
Right, you go into the Geek Space channel, and up top here,
Oh, well.
you may not have it. Somewhere, try your gear. See, maybe it's there. I don't know.
Is this an Android thing?
I don't know. This is an Apple thing.
Well, fuck that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. No. So
I just-
you can go to the channel, and up top there's the little
Oh.
like pot with the arrow thing. I have no idea what that's supposed to be, but the host channel is down
Huh.
there.
Pot with an arrow. I think it's
I don't know what the heck
Send
that's supposed
this to the universe!
Yeah, but how do you describe that?
I feel like pot with an arrow is the sort of thing that you would say when playing Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes.
Pot with an arrow thing? Yes.
Right, that
Yes.
would be...
Well,
The way, it's a squid
That's
with
what
the shield.
streaming is, okay? That is exactly what streaming is.
Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes.
Oh,
Yeah,
goodness.
I mean, your job is to never stop talking, otherwise everybody
Explodes.
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 That's how the
Right,
universe works now. How does Twitch even work? I don't know.
It's a series of tubes, I think.
No one knows, including the people that made it.
It's fair. I'm gonna. Your necklace has been flip flop for a while. and
Thank you.
I'm gonna help you out with that.
been a
'cause
busy
it's been
day.
bothering me. It's fine. It's just been bothering me.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate your.
But I want to point
Fashion
out that you
consultancy.
did do your homework,
Ooh.
which was to bring me cupcakes. So
So that means her characters won't die for the very near future ever.
Oh, she's never GM'd me.
Oh.
that is also true. That is also true.
Wonder why?
I have GM'd many a person. That
That's
is
true.
complicated and difficult.
I have been GM'd by many a person who is complicated and difficult. Nothing will
Yeah.
make you want to GM more than
Oh.
having an incompatible GM.
Oh,
Yes.
that is so true. That is so true.
I mean, the other one was just not having someone available to GM. That was mine. That was how I ended up doing it. Was like, oh, I guess if I want to play this game, I have to run it. Let's play Shadowrun, and that went well.
I had that bad situation where there was an incompatible GM, so they're like, why don't you do it? And I was like, okay. So then I did it, and they're like, keep doing it. And I was like, I'd like to play again. And
No.
they're like, no.
No, once you GM, you can never stop. Who are you, by the way, for anyone who doesn't
Yeah, that's a
know?
good question.
Why are you here?
What? Hello, everyone. I am Trooper SJP, and I am a variety streamer and banjoist and academic.
And what are you an academic of? Because I think it's so cool.
I am an academic of popular music studies, focusing on gender, race, sexuality, and all sorts of identity and politics.
It's super cool. And you're here for a conference, right? Which is not this.
No, no, this is a different kind of conference. No, I'm here for the pop conference at the Museum of Popular Culture.
Mopop.
Mopop.
It's great rebranding.
Yeah, it was originally the Experience Music Project, and it was all about, I think, basically
Nirvana.
Nirvana, and also yeah, Nirvana.
It was supposed to kind of, like, let's be real. I went to it while it was still the Experience Music Project, and it was mostly about Nirvana and then like popular culture because they realized that people would come for that because Seattle is a city of nerds.
Yes. Yes.
And so now they have an action museum called Mopop, or Museum of Popular Culture, and they're doing a conference. And you were visiting Seattle, so we were like, well, we're on our second episode of Behind the Screens, and you have a lot of jamming experience, so it seems like a very good fit to bring you on here to help Anna.
Yes. Also, I have to say, I was here for the conference like 10, 11 years ago.
Oh.
And Seattle is almost, it's different.
Yes. Yeah, as someone who has lived here for almost 11 years, yeah, it's pretty different from when I arrived to now. Besides the fact that, like, the museum is called something entirely different.
That also, but it was sort of like funky and like, oh, there's the stranger and like funky graffiti and
now it's Amazon.
And now it's Amazon. It's very different, very different.
It's better in some ways, and it's just different. Like, I think it's not necessarily, I don't have a huge value judgment for it being better or worse. There are parts of it that are better. Like, it's nice to have fewer creepy parking lots and abandoned buildings, and have those be converted into, like, spaces that are actually being used. But also, it's still a horribly segregated city, among other issues that Seattle has, and so that part, I guess, hasn't really changed. I think it's gotten worse because Amazon.
I feel like the creepy parking lots and warehouses are really good for settings for RPGs. Maybe not so much in real life, though.
Yeah. No, there was a lot of inspiration to draw from for the Shadowrun game. For any game set in Seattle, really.
Yeah. Creepy warehouses gives you a good David Lynch feel, if that's what you're going for. But I don't think people really want to live a David Lynch life in their in their everyday.
It's not what I'm aiming for in my existence. So, Anna, how's the rest of your homework done? So finished, right? We can go home now. You did your homework. Today we're going to be talking
I've been a little busy.
Primarily about world building. But also other aspects of kind of, we're still in the sort of like the setup process, like what does it look like to get started with running an RPG? And so like last week, worked pretty well. If you put the word question before your question, or in the middle of, or at any point really surrounding your question, then you can, then we are more likely to see it and respond to it. I can't guarantee I will respond to everything. I have been trying to make notes. Last time I made a lot of notes about things to bring up in future episodes. Also, you can ask, because she put this down and I'm picking it back up.
I think you failed your con save to not eat the popcorn.
Oh God, this is a wisdom save. This is definitely like a wisdom save. But I did not achieve willpower.
Yeah.
No, that's not a thing in D&D.
Yeah, no, will, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, willpower save, that's fair.
That was a thing that used to be, because it used to
Yes.
be will.
No.
Reflex?
Yeah.
D&D never had will.
Was it still wisdom? Oh, wisdom, reflex, and something else.
Nope.
No.
Dungeons and Dragons has always been the same 6.
No, the
No,
save,
not
the name
stats.
of the saves.
They had different saves
Oh,
in
okay.
4th edition. They named the save something different.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it was like you would do a willpower save, and then that was based off of like your wisdom or
Yeah.
your intelligence. So they had 3 saves that you did instead of the 6, and those were based off of the
Reflex,
Yeah,
will.
reflex, will, and someone's probably gonna remind us. I think might have been con or something like
Oh my god!
that. God damn it!
Evie!
Oh.
Donation because Trooper is the best. He's like our Gandalf, except less colorist.
Because I will have all of
Yay,
the colors.
Trooper.
It's true. I don't need to be Gandalf the white or the gray.
See, that's how Saruman got into trouble, though. He was trying to be Saruman the
Of many
Rainbow.
colors.
And it was like, sorry, not gay enough. And he had to die.
That's fair. That's fair.
Paladin Hulk as well for $5.69. I just wanted to say hi and do my part to keep the channel going. Thank you so much, Paladin Hulk. And Evie, stop. I mean, thank you, but for cripe's sake.
I'm watching you.
We're all watching you.
This is gonna be the whole stream. It's just me. I actually really wonder how long I can keep a stream going, which is just me staring at a camera eating popcorn. And I feel like the answer is, how deep is my bowl of popcorn?
Yeah.
There was this strange online thing way back in the day. It was like a news segment, but it was sort of humorous. And this woman was sort of doing the news, and she did this sort of homage to John Cage's 433, where she just stared at the camera with a kind of a creepy look on her face for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And I don't know if people got what she was doing, but I did, and I
Is
thought
it
it was
433?
pretty...
That's the silence?
That's
Yeah,
the silence
okay.
one, yeah. It was really cool.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
really cool.
It's the concept of having a song that's just silence.
Speaking of silence, I'm really sad that I missed out on Tally Mark Day.
Oh. What marks do you make?
Tally marks.
But for
It's
what
a Doctor
reason?
Who thing.
I don't remember.
Oh.
Evie's at it again.
Uh-oh. Evie. Okay, this is totally better for my mental health and therapy this week, at least. Seriously, I love you all.
Love you too,
Thank you,
Evie.
Evie.
I wish
I'm
I could do
very
that other
buttery.
one.
The one that Claudia does, it involves the middle finger. That's all I learned, because every heart should have a little bit of middle finger in it.
I suppose that's true.
These are words out of Jackie Dash's mouth.
I think I've got that one.
No. I'm gonna
Close,
swap
right?
to the cupcake.
Okay.
I need to bring in better popcorn kernels. These have too many husks, too many shells.
Yeah,
That's the
so
part
it's
that I don't like.
it's that.
Oh, that's...
So it's like, do the can with your hands.
Your hands
So
can
your middle finger goes straight, and you curve the
Oh,
index
that's not
finger.
gonna be easy.
And then you do this. Yeah, but then you do it smoothly and like this, and then you dance.
That is the one button that I
Anime.
have. I can make. That is like the one thing I can do while in this seat is
The
share,
share.
please.
Share, please.
That's it.
It's so polite.
Today's episode is cleverly entitled Rails? What are those? And how do I find them?
So the trick to building your world is to build a very elaborate rail system. A railroad system. That's
Oddly enough, my world totally gonna have a limited rail system.
nice.
Is it funded by the state?
Yes, it's localized to one particular metropolitan area that has it, and in varying limited fashions depending on how far out you get from it.
So I was wondering about the
I
class
got
system
popcorn
in your world. So can anyone take this rail system? Is it free? Does it cost money?
I don't know. The campaign doesn't start anywhere near there.
And you're like, so nobody needs to know about that.
This is an excellent example of making decisions later. So we're going to be talking about world building. I gave Anna a list of questions
And I answered them.
in cupcake form. So I'm going to eat a cupcake, open it up, and find your answer.
You have to eat carefully. Because it's super awkward when you just swallow the ants and you're like, oh no.
Is multi-track
Oh,
drifting
dear.
going to be possible in your world?
I'm not even sure what multi-track drifting is.
I'll find you a video of it. It's also an anime thing. So,
Oh.
cars drifting in a car. Now imagine that with a train, and the front of the train is on one track, and the back of
No.
the train is on the other track.
No.
Well, that's disappointing. I'm out.
I'm not actually sure there will be tracks.
Because it's magic.
magic.
Then is it
And
a
they're
train?
probably magic
Magic lev?
stone platforms that
Oh.
have had levitation cast on them.
That makes
And
sense.
then there's a chain attached in a circuit.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
That chain,
Uh-huh.
are there like people pulling that chain?
Can't tell you on camera.
Oh, never mind then. That's a secret.
It is, actually.
Oh, I love it. I love secrets. Whenever there's secrets, I'm happy.
Okay, so what even is a train? Magical maglevs. Am I gonna eat all the cupcakes? I'm not allowed to. I was explicitly told that there's like one cupcake per person.
Yeah, but you can have one.
I'm allowed one cupcake. I'm not allowed the
Well,
rest of them.
okay. Yes, you're allowed one cupcake. But I'm going to make another batch this weekend because I don't think these came out that great.
I look forward to it. Okay, so world building. I totally have a plan. My basic thought on world building, and feel free to share yours, is I like to, personally, I find it helpful to do a certain amount of it up front. And a lot of it really depends on, like, am I going to be using anything that is pre-generated, or am I creating completely from scratch? And, like, that will kind of inform how much work you need to do up front. And I've done systems where I use everything that's pre-generated, and I do actually 0 world building up front. And then I did Leviathan, where I had to create how 5 different alien... Had to is not the correct word. I chose to create how 5 different alien races procreate. I guess 4, because 5, the 5th one's humans.
If I'm not mistaken, you talked about this on stream.
Yeah.
So obviously, that's where the conversation is going to go, obviously.
No. That was what I was going into the stream planning
okay.
on doing.
Yeah,
I was like, we're going to build
absolutely.
these alien races, and a fundamental part of that is how do they procreate, and therefore how does that inform their culture and society and gender roles and their perspective on life and death.
See, the Legion is actually quite innocent. It's Lauren who corrupts the Legion.
No.
I tried.
You did. I have the look that one cupcake is almost worse than no cupcakes. Yeah, that's fair. Generally, the amount you need to build your world and your setting.
Chaos, thank you so much.
Ooh.
Making up for the week or 2 stream donations I've missed. Darn work and time zone. You guys can swear, I can't. I'm not allowed. $50. Thank you so much, Archaeos.
I got it.
Really,
I did it.
really appreciate it.
You have to do that. It's part of the dance. I don't know how you keep your fingers together while you're doing the dance routine.
By,
Oh.
breaking them, probably?
By being anime enough.
Yeah.
So,
It hurts. It hurts.
the pain is weakness leaving the body. I remember reading that on a t-shirt once.
They said that in the army all the time.
I was pretty sure it
Wow.
was
Yeah.
an ROTC
Yeah, yeah.
t-shirt. And I read it during Relay for Life at like 5 in the morning. And I just remember being like, yeah, no.
Yeah. No. There were a lot of sort of questionable bits of advice that we would get in the military that made
I
me
don't
think,
believe that. I believe that. Just putting more butter on the popcorn over there.
oh.
You're welcome to have some. I'm trying not to hog all of it.
No, you were saying about world building.
Oh, that was what we were talking about.
Yes.
Thank you for keeping me on topic. So, should some taboos in world building be discussed immediately? What do you mean by taboos? Because I think I know where you might be going with that, and I have a couple of thoughts. So, what you're doing and how long you intend to have your campaign run in a specific world will kind of inform how much effort you want to put into it. If it's a one-shot, maybe consider less effort. If it's going to be a long-term campaign, then you might want to have some more stuff up front. Gritty donated $5. Everyone looks so fancy
Oh.
today. I like Anna's dress and Trooper's pocket square. That's my compliment. To Trooper, when did you change your name to Mimosa Cupcake?
Just recently. I just recently changed my name to Mimosa Cupcake.
Is it a first name, last name, or is that like first, middle?
Actually, it's
Double-barreled first name?
yes, that's exactly right. It should be hyphenated, sort of like Cher, but she's not hyphenated. But it would be like if Cher had a hyphen in
Yeah,
her-
if she was like Cher Prince.
Yes,
and
yes.
They just they merged into one person.
That's exactly right.
I didn't read the second one.
Sorry.
Oh,
It's fine. You try. It's okay. I want to point out that I am wearing my teaching clothes. Like, this is a shirt that I would wear to work. So the next donation was from Evelyn Batrivka with $25. How much world building is determined by just genre things you've read, seen, etc., and how much it's specifically done research for a setting, theme, campaign. For example, after I read a lot of post-apocalyptic lit, I made things much sadder than I intended. I think there is definitely a direct influence on, and a lot of this will depend on the person, on like the media that you are consuming and the sorts of media you're going to be creating. So it can certainly be helpful to consume media that is the sort of setting and tone that you want, and using that lovingly as inspiration. Like, I created a pretty long list of shows and things that I was using as inspiration for Leviathan, but it's also cool to be able to take things from other genres and settings into a different one, because otherwise you just end up with the same thing all over again. And you just end up retelling Lord of the Rings for the 7th time.
I really like Werlock's question. But Grinny gave you a...
Your hair is fading to a lovely shade of pastel purple. Thank you, Grinny! Been doing it on purpose. Also, I'm lazy and I don't want to wash my hair in cold water because it's miserable and I like hot showers.
Oh, fair.
So, yeah, the amount of world building, and that'll also determine kind of some of the things that you need to create, because if you are the setting, like if you're running D&D, there is so much stuff that they already give you, which means that you need to decide, some of the decisions are like, am I using all of it or am I not using it? Like, that's almost the first place that you've got to start, as opposed to in a system where they don't give you any of that and you need to generate things on your own. I missed Werlock's question.
It was, which medium do you like to do your creation in? Paper, computer, telegraph?
All of telegraph. I
Theater
actually...
of the mind. Remembering
I'm really into semaphore.
Oh, yeah, me too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I record myself with semaphore.
I was going to say, so you draw little stick figures with the
Also
semaphore
legit.
sign?
Also legit. So I just sort of stand there and I do this in front of a camera, and then from there I can translate my work. No, I use a little bit of both. I like to do, for me, and everyone can answer this question. For me, I tend to start with like a lot of chicken scratch and a notebook, because I find just like the blank page very free, like throw down vomit ideas. And then when I need to start like organizing things out, I'll use more digital tools. So like Google Docs I found is a really useful one, because it's like I can access it from multiple places. So being able to do something on my desktop and on my laptop and my phone. There's some other ones out there, but one that I've really liked using too in the past has been Workflowy, which is like a list generator. So it's really good I've used it for glossaries.
For me, it's Google Docs and Trello. I live in the digital world, and while I prefer paper books still, I find that my notes are much more organized and useful to me if they're digital.
I think that this is a general question about how you manage sort of your writing workflow, and regardless of what sort of writing you need to do. And I think that some of it has to do with knowing how you personally work best, and also knowing that whatever works best for you will probably change, right? There's a moment when writing on paper will probably be very, very good, and then it will be less good, and you need to move into a different sort of mode, and then that mode will not work anymore, and then maybe you need to go back to paper, and there's like sometimes a move there with that one.
There's also nothing wrong with different things using different tools better. So like, I like Leviathan is a good example. I'll eat one in a minute. Leviathan is a good example of like all of my world building notes are on the computer, except for like the stuff that I scratched out and scrawled, and then I sort of like codified it onto the computer. But my everyday plan is always in a notebook. Like I will always do that on paper because it's easier for me to make live edits, which we'll talk about. And it also takes up less space at a table, and I prefer not having a screen in front of me. But I think for some people, digital works better. Like having a digitally planned whiteboards, I think people really like whiteboards. I find them less so. They're more like a notebook page that's bigger and a little bit messier.
Some people like
and
Scrivener.
Easy to erase.
Scrivener is a lot of people swear by Scrivener for, especially for writing, like novels. OneNote is another really can be a useful tool as well. It's like similar. You can have it accessible. It's a lot more freeform. I also love that OneNote has nested notebooks. I got very excited when I found that out, because you can just like you can be like, this is my whole notebook, which is RPG planning, and then you can have a campaign has its own section, and then each of that they have separate sections for like each campaign, and then they have pages.
Evernote sometimes, just sort of depending on where you're going.
So that one I'd say it's use the tools that you have already been successful using, because you will have more success using something you're comfortable and familiar with than trying to start something from scratch. And there's no problem with mixing. The tools can merge. Do I like designing an intricate and detailed world? You're thinking like Tolkien, or do you prefer to create only the parts of the world that will be seen? That's like a bigger overall question about world building.
For me right now, what I'm kind of been dragging my feet doing too much world building because I want my players to have their own corner of it, and I want them to have ownership over that and really collaborate in the building of this world. So making an entire Tolkien-esque world doesn't make sense. I mean, not just because we're a little more Rat Queens inspired, but also because I want them to figure out their place in the world and help me create that. So, yeah.
My inclination tends to be less to go for massive amounts of intricately detailed world building, because I find that a little overwhelming and a little bit stifling. Like, dealing in a setting like Shadowrun, where there's so much that already exists, it's harder to, like, carve out your niche, and you're constantly in this place of being aware of, like, what if I'm going against what the actual rules of this world and setting are, and your sort of ability to make that malleable. In creating my own, I think it's very important, because playing an RPG is a collaborative process, that you leave enough space for your players to collaborate within that process. And that means leaving gaps. That means not knowing things, which is both scary but also fun when, like, your players ask you a question and you have to come up with that answer on the fly. But it also means you can take what they give you and make that a true fact in the world, because you don't have a fact that it conflicts with. One of my favorite moments that happened in season 1 of Leviathan was Sarah's character Thea saying, "Oh, we need to go to Duranga." And I went, "Yes, you do. That is now a place that exists in this world, and you have given me all of the information that I need to know about it." And that was nothing that I had planned for. And they gave me that, and because I hadn't already decided where's this hive of scum and villainy in this sector, they were able to give that to me, which makes less work for me, which is really nice.
Yeah.
For me, I think that sometimes I'm very much an improvisational GM, so I try to set up a space where I can improvise. And I think that when people start getting stressed out about world building, it's because they're thinking of world building as names of people and where all the cities are located. They're thinking about these sort of like details, which can become overwhelming. When I think that one of the most important things for world building is creating motion. Right, so thinking, okay, what are the large tensions in this space? I don't need to know the name of the mayor and the name of the undermayor, but what I may need to know is, okay, there's going to be in this world a tension between the established religion and also the Merchants Guild. And I think they're going to have some kind of conflict that the players can be involved in, always making sure whatever you're planning ties into something that players can do. Or that there's going to be a tension between, what are the large-scale tensions that are happening in this space? And if you can understand, I think, the large-scale tensions and sort of moments for adventure opportunity, then you can just improvise all the rest of that in there. And it becomes, I think, a lot less overwhelming to have, like, you don't have to know all the details, but you just need to know, okay, wait, I think the Crown Princess is maybe having an affair with a neighboring country, so we need that. That'll be good. And the evil uncle wants to undermine that, so maybe I need secret police, right? So, like, you can, I think if you approach world building in terms of function, in terms of what do I need so that the players have things to do, and you know what those larger tensions and movements are, then you can just improvise all of that in the moment, right after that.
Yeah, my inclination is almost always to go for the higher level approach. Like, what are the big players that everyone would know about? Like, in Leviathan, it was Ica. They would all know who Ica is. It exists in that world. That is a big player. What are the, in Shadowrun, you know, the 10 guilds. Whether, guilds? Corps.
Yeah.
Mega corps. Yeah. Fucking. So, like, knowing what the high level players are, and whatever scale you're dealing at, like if it's a global scale, a galactic scale, a local scale, the people that are most important. So if your story is going to take place in a city, who are the most powerful people in that city, or the most powerful groups? Is it the mayor? Is it the police? Is it this? If it's in a country, who are the most powerful players in that country? And I approach that like up front, that's the world building, who are the most powerful players on the scale I need. And then when I'm doing like a session, if it takes place in a new town, then it's who's the most powerful player in this town. And that kind of fills in based on the needs. So I try I try to, again, take that higher level approach and then worry about the details as I go in. And that's where like cheat sheets and randomized generators can be helpful if you're like me and you struggle with names.
Was it
Classy mango.
Emma Thompson? I think?
I had Emma Thompson. I had Natalie Portman. Most recent one I'm very proud of is Classy Mango. It's a good name.
It is a good name. It's a sci-fi game. It's a good name.
So in terms of your story, I'd ask you, what is the scale that you want in terms of how much of the world will the characters spend time in?
Initially, it's actually going to be centered around a very small town, a mining town.
So then I would probably approach from, where's the town take place? Like, who's the biggest, who's the biggest player in the world? Just so they all have a frame of reference, like the government, and then I would really just worry about a lot of the more of the details of the town, in terms of building like more concrete details.
Now you were saying, I think, in the last behind the screens that you were wanting a sort of a quasi sandbox feeling where there'd be like different kinds of missions they could choose or not choose.
Yeah, it's more a matter of the concept of keeping the players on the rails by letting them think there aren't any rails. So it's not so much that it's super sandbox, it's just, okay, here are the 3 different options that they're going to have at this point, including totally blowing all of this stuff off, and what happens when that happens. You know, how do you roll with that, but actually have something at least planned in a vague sense. So
That's sometimes one of the things I like. That's where tropes can be helpful, or not necessarily explicitly tropes. I think I saw Granny's question. Is
I'm just
knowing,
gonna have everybody that we haven't answered your question just ask them again.
Yeah, knowing the kind of like things like tone, or like any core tropes in a region that you're in. So like if the players go off on the rails, you can be like, well, how antagonistic is this part of the world going to be to them? Or how helpful is it going to be to them? Are there, like the trope, like there will be the tavern or whatever. So like kind of having things that you can pull out of your pocket. So like knowing what fits in with a world, knowing what makes sense in a world and what doesn't make sense in a world is really like, that's kind of your line. You need to be like, that's where you need to get to when you're building a world.
Yeah.
So that then you can answer a question when the players ask, does this exist? You can be like, yes, or no, because you know what fits or what doesn't.
And I think that's something that you were alluding to, which I think is so important. I think that when people think about sandboxes, they think about, oh, it's open, you can do whatever you want, but there's nothing there, right? Like maybe they put a lot of houses in there, but there's nothing in that space. It's just an empty space. And I think that to have what I like to call a directed sandbox, you have to have people who have plans, right? Like there are people in this world who have plans, who have goals, who have a trajectory, and who have tensions. And so things are happening that are explosive and interesting, that are that the players will get swept up in, right? That's not a rail. There's a person who's planning on buying up all the water rights on this planet to do all these things, and that is happening. And as players, then they have to deal with that one way or the other. And it might be that we're going to ignore this evil overlord buying up all the water rights to oppress the people. But then you just did that.
And then that'll have an impact on the world that they exist in now. An evil overlord owns all the water rights, and they'll have to deal with that if they're staying
there. And you're thirsty.
And you're thirsty. And I think that building in all of those sort of tensions also helps. Like, okay, well, I know there's an evil overlord that's buying up all the water rights, and my players just said they wanted to do something super random. For example, they decided they want to go to the tavern. Okay, so let's say they go into the tavern and there are shortages of beer because the tavern owners, who they already like, can't get water. All right, so I know this large thing is happening. This is how this is going to connect to them, even though I had no idea they were going to go to a tavern. But I know that these things are happening, so I can put that in there. So there's a way in which you can always, there's an ease of improvisation when you know the large scale, who's important and what do they want. Like, what is the character, what do they want, what are their goals and needs? Then you can sort of and then I think that makes world building less stressful because you don't waste time doing things that are not useful to the campaign itself. And you're setting yourself up to have a kind of a coherent feeling, even if the players have a lot of maneuverability.
Yeah, I think it going with even with sandbox, like when you're building a world, you don't need to fill everything in.
Right.
Like you don't need to completely create something. Is building people more important than the world? That's kind of a personal approach. Claudia likes to build NPCs. That's like one of her favorite things to do. Maybe not her favorite. I don't know. I'm putting words in her mouth, but she likes to build NPCs. You will notice in many of her campaigns there are a lot of NPCs, and she gets very into kind of their motivations and like can answer a ton of questions about them. I build NPCs out of necessity because I tend to want fewer NPCs in a world because I think that can overshadow players or whatever. My perspective on them is different, so I actually don't tend to build people. I tend to build organizations.
I'm gonna interrupt for just a second to say, DM, check the mod Discord, where I've been messaging you guys. So I tend to build organizations and those groups and what their motivations are as opposed to a specific individual, and I only start making individuals when I think they're going to become important. That's more of a personal preference. You can build a world or a setting around people. Good point, DM. I'm sorry. Paladin Hulk, check the Discord. Trooper, check the...
Oh no! But I would say that for me, all those things, like whether or not you're doing organizations or people, that's the same thing. Those are actors, right? Like that you have actors in your world, and those actors can be one small individual, like a random sort of urchin on the street. They can be sort of large people. They can be organizations.
They can also be like natural events and things like that. Like knowing the things that are changing the world is probably the bigger scale. Is it an organization or a person or a volcano that's going to erupt? And that relates to the question about having time limits. That's a little bit of world building, but a little bit more into like actual running a story. One of the things I would suggest looking into, and I've started using this, is progress clocks. It's something from the Blades in the Dark system, and I think it's been used before that, but I couldn't find his reference to where he got the idea from or figured out if it was just like a thing that he was the first one to codify it. I don't know. But progress clocks or counters are kind of a potential way to track time happening. Time is a very hard thing to do, so I'm gonna put that down as a thing to talk about. Yeah, I finished it.
What I will say though is that the question, the quasi you asked, is it okay? And I think what I would say in general is that's not the question to ask. Is it okay? Everything is okay, nothing is okay. And that's very sort of philosophical, but the question is, do you do it well? Do your players like it? I mean, I think that there have been many campaigns set on a time limit. There have been many campaigns that haven't been set on a time limit. Sometimes you mix and match. It just sort of depends on where everyone is at. I mean, I know there was a friend of mine told me about a campaign they did, which was all the players woke up. They just woke up, and a big bad mob boss said, "We have just injected you with some nanites that will kill you in 24 hours. You have 24 hours to give me $100,000. Because you owe me this money, you need to go and get it." And then the players then had 24 game hours to try to figure out how to earn this money. And that was a really fun one-shot for that particular group where that time limit was part of the setup. But the idea of you have 5 days to defend a town, that's fine. I think that sort of time pressure is very useful sometimes to sort of motivate the players to move forward. Sometimes, but then sometimes you don't want that. You want them to have a bit more space to breathe and to sort of mosey. It just sort of depends on, I'd say, mix it up, know your players, have variety.
It's very much about knowing your players and also knowing what your conventions are already. If it's a campaign that's been going on for a while, when you are dealing with like suddenly like giving them time limits, just knowing what your conventions as a group are for the passage of time. Like, I'm in a campaign right now where we're really bad at time skips. Like, we just do everything all of the time, and we can never skip time forward. But like in Leviathan, time passes. Like, a bunch of time has to pass. Because every time they're on the ship and they go through thread space, like, days pass in there. And so it's kind of knowing how to bend in. That's definitely something we can talk about, is how to do time at the table.
Quasi, I don't think it's a bad question at all. I think I just want to say, be empowered to try things. I think being less worried about, is it okay if I try this thing, and just try the thing. I think that generally speaking, that as a GM, just try things. make sure that the things you're trying are things your players are okay with. But I think that people get too nervous about messing up. And, it's a game. You try things and it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that you can make mistakes as the GM, and that if you don't like how something turned out or they don't like how something turned out, you kind of like back up on it and be like, I won't do that again, or I'll do it differently if I'm going to do it again. Trying new things is fun. And scary. The character is struggling with their desire to retire from adventuring. What do you mean? They are struggling because they want to retire or they don't want to retire? Do you recognize that means you can confront them? Happy families. That's a very specific question. I might need you to explain it again.
Well, I was going to say, sorry, Paladin Hulk. I think we should try and avoid, at least for now, specific questions. We're trying to do the overall how-to, not a specific how-to, right?
Yes.
I mean, but I'm sitting here thinking, Lauren Bond fixes your game. Wouldn't be a bad show idea.
I've lost my popcorn. It's on the floor.
So if you're starting in a mining town, right? So you're going to start in this mining town. There are going to be larger things going on which they're not going to necessarily run into yet. So I suppose you just need to know what of those larger things will impact them now in the small town, sort of do a little bit of foreshadowing or set things up. But really, you don't need to do that much work on all that rest of the stuff because the players aren't going to get there yet. And who knows, they may take a lot longer than you think to get out of the town, depending on how players can be.
Yeah. I know, I am one. Splanks coming to a store near you. What?
You trying to make a space pun?
No.
Oh.
No, I was making a Mayhem and Misfits joke that you missed out on.
Oh.
I was busy. I had a show to be in about space. It was a good show. Okay, world building. We're going to go through the questions that I had for you.
Do you have an approximate equivalent era, tech, and industrialization for your campaign? There are going to be elements that are definitely like industrial or even post-industrial-ish, but overall it's going to be a largely fantasy-based environment. So, stereotypically fantasy-based, where they're using swords and not guns and stuff like that. With few exceptions, and I think the city that doesn't have a name yet, the closer you get to it, a little more Fey-punk it's going to get. So little more industrial era type things popping up, but all magic based rather than tech. But even that city, I don't envision being more Fey-punk than it is standard fantasy. I want it to have elements of it, and those to ripple out from there into other elements of the world, but still not pervasive.
What color is the gazebo?
Ooh.
It's a very important world building question.
What gazebo?
There we go.
I'm confused. I'm sorry.
Quasi, generally speaking, I will actually say, if players take a long time to do stuff, awesome. You don't have to plan for the next session because you've already planned it. The only time that becomes like stressful or problematic for me is on the audience perspective, or if you think your players are getting bored or frustrated, and in which case then figure out what part about that is making them go slowly or bored or frustrated and pick and pull on that. When it comes to running a show campaign, there are times where you're like, no, you actually have to get to this point by the end of this episode, and that's when you have to pull on things a little bit more when you have an actual like end date and it's a limited run campaign. But if it's just an ongoing one, like awesome, you're good. Your planning's taken care of for next week. I do that a lot. Happens to me all the time.
Anne, I might ask you a question.
Okay, sorry. I'm running the stream. Hang on.
This is the behind the scenes portion of
Sorry, that is why I mentioned this last episode. If I keep on my phone, it's because I'm running the show. I'm running a studio right now, so give me 1 second.
Multitasking.
How do you structure adventure slash scenarios differently comparing... Oh god, I lost it. Improv to something. Something.
It was a good question.
That's what. Comparing improv background and players and more private friends. Also, do you present or receive a scenario instead of a script? Improv doesn't have scripts, which is important. It took me about 10 years to get... I think my parents know that now. I love them. But I get the question a lot. So, you don't have a script? No
Have you
script.
memorized your lines yet?
I hadn't had to memorize lines in years. Oh yeah, just so you know, our phone policy in class.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to tell you our phone policy in class because it's the same as when I was in college. My professors knew I was getting more done on my phone than I was by being in their class. True story.
So I wanted to ask you,
Yeah.
what do you imagine the players doing in your initial setup of the world?
Being the chaos monkeys that they are, largely. I don't know. Maybe more context in what you're asking exactly.
So I suppose the question is, when you, and this is about creating PCs, but it's also about world building. When you present the pitch to the game to the players, and they're about to make characters, what do you tell them in terms of guidance for how they're going to make their characters? Do you say, I want you to, like, you're going to start in a small mining town, I want you people from this town, or I want you to be people who are ready for adventure? Like, what is the sort of...
Well, we haven't done it yet, which is a problem. Not stressed at all. It's fine. But generally, I want to collaborate with them on figuring out why they're there. Because I don't know what any of their backgrounds are going to be. I don't have intention of limiting them much on what they can play, really at all. I mean, I don't care if there's a fighter, a cleric, a rogue, and a wizard. I don't care. They all want to be wizards. I can roll with that. They all want to be fighters. I can roll with that. And so to me, it's more about, like, where do they come from? How did they get here? How, why are they here? And what do they want 20 years from now? These things are all more important to me than class and the exact build of their character. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but
Because it's an important part of world building. Like, I find that,
Yeah.
I think that it's so important to keep the players in mind when doing world building. So if you want to do it sort of like players first, where you bring the players together and you say, okay, why are you all here together? That will then impact, right, as a GM, what that, because you're like, oh, okay, you all actually want to be part of a private detective agency. Now I know I need to sort of add that into my world building, or you do it ahead of time and then. But I think that with world building, in addition to things like, do you have magic, or what kind of foes will they have, or how do these things work? Also just thinking, what is it that I imagine those players doing, or what do they want to do? That I think is a really important sort of part of world building. Just always that functional world building.
Yeah, I think the focus for a lot of what I gave you questions for was on, like, the functional pieces of it, so that you have, like, your base level of information of what the world looks like that you can kind of hand to your players. Because I've definitely, like, as a player, when you're like, you can do anything, I'm like, no, it's choice paralysis.
Yeah.
And having some kind of limitations and guidelines on what you can and cannot do within a world, knowing the sort of tone or feelings is helpful as a player. But I think of world building as a living process for me. I have, like, this is the basic information that you have to start with, and then everything else is the yes and on top of that. Like, I did not create a race of matriarchal lions. Tony did. And now they exist in my universe. And I did not create the bats. And so all of those things are things that have been added in by the players, but they knew the context of, like, here's how weird aliens can be in this world, so I can make aliens that are weird.
I feel like we could do an entire episode on Fogsight's question. And not specifically, but the overall concept of Fogsight's question.
Especially that second part about important to anchor players emotionally. For me, it's important that players give a shit about the world that they're in.
Yes.
In some capacity.
Yep.
It can be the Guardians Galaxy, like, I'm one of the idiots who lives in this world, and so it's important to me that I, like, don't let the universe die. But, like,
Yeah.
they need to, it's up to me, though, it's on, to some extent, on the players to make emotional investments in a world. I can present them with options, but if they don't invest in those things, like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can give your players emotions, but you can't make them cry. Like, and I think
Unless you hit them with something really hard.
I've tried that. It didn't go so.
Oh.
I stole dice from a child. She didn't cry then. So I think that is an important piece, but that is where the piece of knowing your players, knowing what they want in that world, is the thing you can use to inform the importance of things that are important to them, what the emotional stakes are.
And that's one of the kind of requirements that I always have for players is I want you to be the kind of person that is at bare minimum going to say, hey, I have to live in this world too. Ugh, if nobody else is going to save it, I might as well.
Yeah.
Like, at the bare minimum, you have to be able to step up and be like, darn it, I live here too. All right.
So, for example, if a player came to you and said, Anna, I want to create a player in this world who doesn't want to adventure and doesn't like other people and wants to stay home. And will.
Well, you bring it home for them.
You're like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you sat on your butt. Let's fast forward a little bit and see what happens.
There's no
look,
water in
now
your
it's
town.
more difficult. Yeah.
Evie asked me that question in Discord. I did accidentally. So, to context of stealing dice from a child, I ran a game for a bunch of Girl Scouts, and then I got home and I looked at my dice bag and I went, I didn't own this blue die before. I remember the child next to me owned this blue die. I put two and two together and realized I had taken it by accident.
Oh.
But it rolls really well for me sometimes, as all dice do. About 5% probability to roll a 20 for me.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. That's an awful lot.
Yeah. So, bringing back to the kind of base level, like functional pieces of the world, let's go through some of the questions that I gave you for your homework that you totally did. We broke it down.
Absolutely.
Either Discord's fine. You could ask it in the Leviathan channel. That would make sense. So I broke it down into kind of 4 major pieces that I think are some of the cores of D&D in terms of what D&D gives you to start with. The species, and that includes like humanoid and non-humanoid, magic, religion, and then one that's less about D&D and more just about general worlds is the geography, which is human and physical geography. Look at me use technical languages. So in terms of species, D&D gives you a whole book on them, if not more. And one of the things we talked about is several books on them, is kind of breaking that down. For the humanoid species, are you planning on having, like, instinctually, do you want to have all of the core races that are in the book? Are there any you want to alter from their core presentation, in terms and their core story? I'm gonna make notes for you.
The only one that I'm on the fence with is tieflings. I think tieflings are dumb.
Why?
I just like it. So
I'm literally writing tieflings are dumb.
Particularly for me, growing up playing D&D, I was around a lot of people that fall into the wanting to make something dark and gritty with a touch of evil. And tieflings just always struck me as that in a package. They're basically like, well, you can't play a drow elf, but you could play a tiefling. And I'm just like,
Wait, why couldn't they play drow elf? Because in my day, it was just all drow elves.
Well, that's
all drow elves all the time.
Because in various editions there aren't rules for them.
Oh.
They're not player character races or whatever.
So many edgelord drow elves.
Yeah, basically. But
I
I recognize that there's a lot
favorite.
more complexity to tieflings and to the people that I have played tieflings with, that is something that I'm totally not decided on and kind of waiting to see what the players think about substituting that for something else.
Drow elves.
Edgy drow elves.
I was thinking kitsune.
Oh.
Of course you are. I mean, that'd be really cute.
I know.
On the requirement that at least either one player or NP, like a character kitsune has fennec fox ears.
Well, yeah, there'd be like, there'd be different types. Obviously, there's the regular kitsune and then the miniature kitsune, which are fennec fox.
It's gonna be like Zootopia. That is probably one of my favorite parts of Zootopia is the tiny fennec fox.
Oh goodness.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so I've got tieflings are dumb. Any of the other, you've mentioned a couple of things
What
about
about a red panda race? And see, that is the rabbit hole that I always fall down. That is why this campaign hasn't started yet. Because it's like, ooh, but what about red pandas? What about regular pandas? Oh, no, then we have Kung Fu Panda.
Oh.
Also, like, regular pandas are very lazy.
Which is why
Like-
Kung Fu Panda
like,
is problematic, obviously.
I feel bad for the fact that pandas are going extinct, but also, like, they're really not helping themselves. They're really not. Like, they eat one food, it's bamboo, and that food makes them not want to have sex.
Oh. Probably
Like,
that.
it, like, that's really, and then also they just, like, they're so fragile when they're born. The pandas are really not helping us help them.
Maybe you need to do an intervention with the pandas?
Yeah, like,
Have like
okay.
a discussion?
We need you guys to just make with the making. Okay. Minor bit of flavor text. Question. How do you do when a minor bit of flavor text becomes, I think it's something like the whole, Habas Mito Stickos?
Breaks everything.
Oh, breaks everything about your entire setting. I guess I've never had that happen. I feel like it
Yeah, I don't
shouldn't.
know. Yeah, I don't let it.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like the wrong answer. That seems like something I shouldn't tell you, but just don't let it.
Yeah.
Tell it no, sternly.
Yeah.
And give it a lessons on consent, I guess. I don't know.
Or either you just say no, because I will say this, GMs are allowed to say no.
It's okay.
It's okay. Or imagine your setting as a bit more fluid and that things change.
I think you touched on something we should definitely talk about extensively on this show. Me, growing up with RPGs, the full phrase was always yes and or no but. So you can say no, but you should follow it up with a little give and take. And that is very, very important. Because apparently in improv, it's just yes and. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, all right.
Because no
well,
but
that's good.
doesn't really work in improv.
Which makes sense.
I've been there. I've been there in a scene and someone's like, no, but, and you're like,
But for RPGs, and even RPG shows, no, but is totally valid.
because there's a different relationship between scene partners in an improv game and a GM and a player.
Yeah.
Scene partners in an improv game are at the exact same level in terms of their ability to influence and create a story. A GM is slightly above what the players can do. Like, they're the kind of the arbiter. They're there to make things make sense. And I don't know how much improv some of you have seen, but it does not always make sense. And it is very difficult to make it make sense sometimes.
And I also think the sort of the advice for the yes and advice, which is sort of popular at the moment, is almost always being aimed at GMs, when really I think it should be aimed a little bit more at players. Sometimes the player should be internalizing that yes and because when the GM says, oh, well, there's a burning building and also some orphan kitsune in there.
Yes, and my character doesn't care.
Their poor fur.
At least they're not baby koalas.
Koalas are dicks.
They're also super flammable.
That's
Really?
true.
Did you not know that?
Yeah, I'm not.
Koalas are apparently the most flammable animal because they live in eucalyptus oil all of the time. Their fur is saturated
They
with
probably deserve it.
it. They all have like gonorrhea too or something like that.
Poor koala. Poor koala.
Okay, so back in Boston, I had a couple of very dear friends who were both from Australia. And apparently, just about everything, aside from the people that live in Australia, total dicks. And even most of the people, too.
But also poisonous and will kill you.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, Australia's a very sort of poisonous place, where apparently New Zealand is not. That is a thing that I was told by a New Zealander.
I believe it.
That New Zealand will not kill you.
No,
But
it won't.
Australia
Well,
will.
no, because it's the Shire. Basically, that's where the Shire
It's
is.
the Shire.
Obviously, there's
It's
nothing
also,
there
like,
that will kill you because
Mordor.
the rangers in Australia are protecting them.
Fair.
That is fair.
Make a good point.
I'm just gonna push my glasses up a little.
You're a nerd.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got through tieflings. You mentioned a couple of things about elves and dwarves in your world.
Mm-hmm.
Are those things, because those are not things that are provided in the D&D guide, are those things that you want to bring in as something for your world? Because at some point you just need to make a decision.
Oh, about the different ideas that I had for elves and dwarves. Yeah, elves will just be a matriarchy, but have gender, and then dwarves are gender neutral and don't use gendered pronouns.
So that would be an example of information you will just tell your players and be like, if you want to play a dwarf or an elf, these are pieces that
But
you will need to.
I mean, like, overall, we live in a gendered society, but there are exceptions.
I imagine
But
that
they will need to know going into
That they're
it
playing an
that
exception.
my dwarf has gender. And they'll be like, well, okay, what is that going to look like? And then we have that negotiation for what that looks like. Do they understand gender? A little. Not a lot. I can imagine many humorous moments around that could be productively humorous.
potentially some of the one it might vary on the level of exposure that they've had to cultures that are not dwarves. And that's a good example, I think, of that's pretty much all you need to know. Like, you're like, yeah, their reaction to gender is going to be based on the amount of exposure, and then when you build a dwarf NPC, you'd be like, this dwarf has lived in the city their entire life, so they're totes chill with it. This dwarf has never met anyone that's not a dwarf, and then that's it. That informs exactly how that character is going to interact with the other. Paladin, I think the main thing I would say about the idea of gender, if a player cares about, there's a difference between the theme of a show and the theme of a character, or even a component of a character. Like, you can have a character, like, for example, I've run campaigns with players who are explicitly playing characters that are agender or non-binary, and that doesn't mean it's a theme of the show, even though it's a thing that we're going to bring up every so often in the show. It's part of that character, their story, and the way they interact with the world. But that doesn't mean that the show's about it.
And it may not even be a theme for that character.
Yeah.
Some characters may want to be, have a minority gender, sexual, some kind of minority identity, but then have that not even be a thing. I was playing in a Wild West sort of game, and there was a discussion of, do we want to be historically accurate in terms of certain attitudes? And the players were like, no, we don't. And I was like, fine, we will not. So then you can be whatever race you want, and it will not be an issue in this particular game, because nobody wants it to be. We want to just have an Old West game where we can do Old West things. They were all about like ranching or something rather, and not have that
not have that
be an issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's also fine. And sometimes you want it to be an issue, sometimes you don't want it to be an issue, and that's all about. That's about world building, but it's also about that discussion with your players about what it is what kind of experience they want in that world.
I think you also have to remember, like, in this context, the dwarves are a thing everyone knows about. Like, it is not like, what? That's weird. It's like, no, everybody knows this as a fact about dwarves, and therefore it is, some people may still be bad at it because they're used to gendering because they're human and that's what they do. Or for, like, if they're elves, they still just refer to all the dwarves as she, and the dwarves are like, what? And the elves are like, but it's one pronoun, we just use a different one. And so you have those things, but it's not just because it's a whole civilization in the world. Like, I have alien races that are all one gender or whatever. It doesn't make it a theme of the world.
I saw some Cryomancer Maurice was saying, can all dwarves in your world grow beards? Yes. And then second, dwarves have two genders, beard and not beard.
That also makes sense. So elves and dwarves, did you have any other thoughts? And tieflings, dragonborns? That's another one that's in, like, the core player book.
Yeah, Dragonborn always seemed
Gnomes,
strange
halflings.
to me, but, like, another like power gamer type indulgence. I want to be a dragon. Well, how about this? But at the same time, it's like, why not? which is the same sort of thing with tieflings. So
This brings up something I think is very specific to D&D.
I think they will probably exist, but be somewhat secluded or far away generally. So you'll see them occasionally, but they're not commonplace. So sorry.
I was saying I think something that is actually very specific to running D&D is that D&D comes with baked in a lot of player expectations.
Yes.
And it's less so with 5e, but certainly with 3e, where there were all those splat books where players would buy these splat books and they would then expect to be able to use them because they spent money on them, and according to the publishers, it is canon. So whenever running D&D, if you're going to change things about these sort of entitlements, right, it's important to be very upfront about it. I mean, I was once in a game as a player where the dungeon master decided that he didn't like many classes, and so you could be a fighter or a ranger because he liked rangers, but you couldn't be a barbarian or a paladin or anything else. And so like which classes were available to you were very limited, and which races, and that was fine. We just had to know ahead of time. And so I think with other systems where the expectations, like with Stars Without Number, those expectations are not there.
Exactly.
So the players just take what you give them. But when you're doing D&D, they often come with these expectations that like, oh, well, I'm going to go and play an Aasimar because it's in the book. And so I think just sort of managing that particular sort of setup of expectations that players have, that if it's in the player's handbook, then of course I can have it. Up front, I mean, I always give a little, usually like a 1 or a 2-page handout before they start getting to character creation with just some things you need to know before you start thinking about your character. In this system, these are how elves work, these are how dwarves work, and actually in this system there are no gnomes in this particular setting. Or there are gnomes, but, you know, they're all, like, they have the highest level of class and status in the entire setting. Whatever sorts of kind of basic things they need to know before they start getting attached to player concepts too much. Just
Yeah, because I ran a D&D campaign and I didn't want all of the races. I had elves, dwarves, and humans, and that was it. And I was like, I don't want tieflings and dragonborns and all of those things. So I just made the decision up front that I had only those 3, and I told them, I was like, you can play those 3, and any class is good to go. And that was the limitation that I wanted to have. So yeah, the D&D specifically, you just have to like just be upfront with the players. Normally they're fine with it, and if they're not fine with it, maybe they shouldn't be at your table.
this is also fair.
Yeah.
So I think
Checking. We got $10 from WWF. We love you all, even if you are a fussy eater too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think WWF is talking about me because I'm a super taster, and I don't eat bitter things. I think
That's fair.
How did you know, WWF? How did you know?
I'm like World Wildlife Federation. Are they talking about how I was talking about how koalas are dicks? I don't know.
Maybe I don't know.
But I'm not eating koala. I'm confused.
But you could.
It would be easy to cook.
Do you know that eucalyptus explode? Like there's a type of tree, eucalyptus tree. My undergraduate had no longer institution had all these beautiful eucalyptus trees.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Because like 150 years ago, they brought in these eucalyptus trees, so they thought they'd be really good for like logging and whatnot. But they brought the wrong species of eucalyptus tree, so they weren't good for logging. And it turns out after about 100 or so years, they started exploding. And so we'd be walking around campus, and all of a sudden we'd hear this crack, and the eucalyptus tree would just like collapse, and so that was bad. And so they took all the eucalyptus trees out, and everybody freaked out. They're like, oh, but the eucalyptus trees, we love them and they smell so good, but they exploded on people. So you just
So maybe don't have exploding trees.
Them. But maybe
That
you
could be
want
part
them
of your world.
in your world.
Well, so when I was younger, I read this
idea.
series called Spell Singer, and in this, one of the details that I remember is they're walking along. So it's about this guy that, of course, straight white dude, right? It's about this guy that gets transported into this alternate dimension that has anthropomorphic animals all over the place. Like they're I don't know if they have any other type of animal, but whatever. I don't remember that part.
Interesting.
But they're walking through the woods, and the protagonist goes to kick a pine cone out of the path, and the otter that he's traveling with like tackles him away from it. Because there's a chance that it will explode, because that's how trees protect themselves. So that made me think of. There you go.
I think we also figured out that it's judging me for being a panda hater.
I figured. Yeah.
Okay, so
But thank you, whoever it was, for that donation. We really appreciate it.
Any other humanoid species that we need to or want to talk about? Did you have concepts for any of the other ones? Ones like there's obviously halflings and gnomes. I think are the other major two that are in the player handbook.
I'm not particularly plussed about
So those will be
halflings or gnomes. They can be there, sure. Hey, you do great things. I love all your shows. Take this. It's dangerous to go out there alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anon.
Anon.
Thank you, Anon.
Thank you very, very much.
Anon, not a nun.
Anon.
It's true.
Because it could have been a nun.
It could have. Do nuns get paid that well?
I don't know. Don't they have vows of poverty?
I have no idea.
Doesn't this?
Wouldn't it be nice?
But now, doesn't this also talk about religion? And isn't there a thing on your?
Yeah, let's
Oh,
talk about. I
so
mean, we
weird.
haven't gone through
Oh,
the
yeah,
monsters,
whatever.
but that's fine. So monsters was kind of the other question that we had, because D&D basically has a world where, like, yeah, there's regular animals, and then there's a fuck ton of monsters everywhere, all of the time. What is the prevalence, would you say, in this world of, like, non-standard animals, would you think?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. They're there.
Okay, so you want to have monstrous creatures that do exist in your world. Are they going to be particularly common? Are those things that might be troublesome to people on a regular basis? Like, I guess kind of how common are monsters in this world?
Common enough to be plot specific, but not so common as to be an overall problem all the time.
Yeah.
So then I think that brings up the question of what do you think about orcs and trolls? So those sorts of
true.
monster races that are sort of seen as people in certain ways, what people you can kill, and without you think that's like how do you want to deal with the presence of monster races? Right?
Well, it depends. Many of them are actually sentient,
Right?
so they are people.
Right? Yeah.
And that's how I plan on dealing with that. There's going to be some stuff I don't really want to, like, I'll give away to the players, but I don't really want to necessarily give away now. But there are definitely going to be some that are cruel and malicious, and then there are going to be some that are viewed as being cruel and malicious that are like, we're just trying to live. We're just trying to live. It's not our fault that you were cutting down our woods or whatever. So yeah.
And that's actually an important piece with setting up those expectations, because like in a traditional D&D, if you're like, there's a bunch of goblins, people are going to have preconceived notions of what that means. So if there are like a handful of sort of specific monstrous humanoids that your players should know about as characters, then you should identify those. And here's a fun fact: you don't have to identify them now.
Sorry, Fireraven. Yes, I do mean sapient.
You can identify them when your players encounter them by saying, you would know this about this species.
Yes.
Because I do that a lot. Like, this is information you would know that you haven't known up until this point because we haven't had to deal with it yet.
Yeah.
And it helps avoid huge info dumps in the beginning, right? So you bring it up when you need it. Alyssa Faye asks, I think a good question is it safe for villagers to walk from one town to a neighboring town? And I will note that many times it was not safe for villagers, if they were even allowed, in our own world to walk from one town to a neighboring town. Sometimes they were just not allowed to walk because they were serfs. They didn't have mobility. But also,
Serfs is a nice word for slaves.
it is. But also, it wasn't safe for people in many places to go outside of their home in their town at night because we didn't have lights. And like at night was not a time to leave. And so I think that what's interesting about that is that you can have, I think that sometimes people imagine you can't have an interesting, adventurous world in a modern day setting or in a more historical setting or a future setting because everything will be too safe. But it wasn't safe walking outside, in our own world. So I think that one can have a fantasy setting where it's not safe to walk from one village to the next without overemphasizing kind of like a villainy of monstrous races. Like there can be a highway, all sorts of things can be out there that's dangerous.
Yeah. And that's actually my first thought was, it's like, well, regardless of the monsters, it's probably not super safe to but it depends very much on where you are. Like the closer you are to a major metropolis, the better patrolled the roads are going to be, the fewer bandits, the fewer monsters of any kind that are going to be around. So
Could I ask you a question?
kind of depends, yeah.
Based on some of the things you're saying, I'm sort of excited. One of the things, so there are different kinds of fantasies, right? I think that one of the things about Dungeons and Dragons, core, basic, vanilla Dungeons and Dragons, is that it's not particularly, if you don't mind me saying, it's not particularly very mysterious, in the sense that people know how magic works. Magic's not very mysterious. They know what the monsters are, so that's not particularly mysterious. Like, it's, there's not a lot of mystery in the world. But I was thinking about in The Hobbit, when they're traveling through the Mirkwood, right? And there are those sort of will-o'-the-wisps out there, and they're like, oh, do we follow those lights? And there was something very mysterious and sort of eldritch about the forest and the woods that is not often a feeling you get in a basic D&D game, because everyone kind of knows what's happening.
Yeah.
And you were talking about
Because most players also own the Monster Manual.
Yeah, they own so they know all of that. But you were talking about Fey-punk and the ways in which you talked about sort of changing up dwarves and elves sort of made me think that perhaps you might have a different feeling towards magic or what it might seem to travel. And I'm wondering if you had thoughts about what kind of vibe you want in your world in that way.
I would love to kind of capture that feeling of mystery at various points, but I freely confess I haven't the faintest idea how. Without creating a whole lot of house rules or my own creatures, things that I don't have time for. I think that I definitely am going to play loose with the rules, and I think that will help. But so I mean, yeah, if I can create some degree of mystery, sure, darn right, I'm going to.
Talk about how to quick build monsters, because that's a thing that I'd like to do.
Okay, but like that's still okay. So we got one. Like, it's not something that I personally have time to do for this world, this adventure, but I do have time to be like, okay, this forest, people don't really understand. Maybe the Feywild is a little bit closer to the prime material here, or whatever. Wiggly room is good.
I think actually what can help a lot, I was running a Renaissance fantasy campaign, sort of Renaissance Florence, but with some magic. That what I did was I had NPCs do things like, oh wait, you're going to travel to the next town? Oh, you shouldn't. I mean, it's very dangerous in the woods, and nobody knows what happens. And if you do want to travel, then only travel. Like, having the NPCs freak out a little bit about and respond to the world as if it were mysterious helps normalize the idea that maybe it's just not so cavalier, right? And it sort of I think it rewinds, because I think the kind of power fantasy that happens in D&D, which can be awesome, also elicits a sort of feeling of security. And I think that some of the ways to combat that, if you want something different and you don't want to sort of just make new monsters all the time, is just have NPCs be like, oh my gosh, and have a sense of worry, or in little things like, well, my uncle decided to sort of go adventuring and we never saw him again, sort of giving a sort of a sense of like, oh, we don't know what's happening in the world, or someone, changelings showed up on our doors.
And things like wizards know how magic works, but do commoners. So yeah, no, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's really good advice.
Pumpkin, your question is great. I'm going to hold on to it for when we get to the part talking about more physical geography. And then
there was an earlier one too.
Evie's question, they repeated.
Okay,
she repeated it.
Cool. How do you think about how PCs are inherently violent people? How will they be viewed by a farmer, potter, tanner, etc.? That's a really good question, and my goal is to not have them be like, I mean, my goal is to not have them be murder hobos. Will death be a part of their job? Sure. But I don't think it has to be the only part of their job. I don't think that it has to be pervasive in a D&D campaign, even though the rules are generally structured around it. That doesn't mean that you can't have other sorts of campaigns. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I think a lot of it depends as well on, are they coming to that farmer / potter / tanner / etc. covered in blood?
Yeah. And I actually also think what's interesting
or
is
covered in bandages.
Right. They may not. I think the PCs don't have to be inherently violent. They might or may not be, depending on how they decide to solve their problems. But what I think is interesting, if you're thinking about this as in a kind of a quasi-medieval space, is that what PCs have that a lot of people don't have is mobility, like a journeyman, right? Like they're able to travel and see different places in ways that many other people don't or can't. And that gives PCs a kind of a special, interesting bit of mystique and allure about them, maybe a romance about them, even many people want to do that, which can give you a different feeling rather than Murder Hobos, like, oh, you've traveled to another place? Oh, what was that like? Maybe you could send a message to someone, or what have you seen? And you can, I think that by thinking about what does it mean to be mobile in a space where people don't have cars, right? Or where people, don't have that kind of mobility, you can bring about a really different and interesting vibe that can combat murder hoboism and replace it with something that's still pretty cool.
Yes.
So the next part of our species conversation is about culture and how those relate to the different species that you have. There is a tendency, I think, in D&D to have monoculture species. Wood elves are all the same. Hill dwarfs are all the same. And then humans are not.
They're special.
We're super special. My question related to this is, are you going to have kind of cultural monoliths based around species to any extent, given what you were saying about dwarves and elves? The answer seems like partially yes. So how is kind of culture being defined within the bigger picture of the world?
That is a good question.
We can come back to it when we talk about some of the scale of what you're looking at, because like knowing countries is another way that we define cultures, major religions,
And
geographical location.
I think the geography is going to dictate a lot more of it than the species.
Okay.
I think that there will be certain cases like the dwarves who are probably, I'm kind of envisioning, at least in the campaign area, dwarves probably all come from one massive underground kingdom. Or what would that be called?
This is a larger question. This is down in geography, I know. But I'm wondering what kind of governmental systems these dwarves have.
And that was exactly where I was kind of like, well, okay, that's a gendered term, but that brings me to the question of why have it be structured that way? Yeah, empire is a good one.
Or maybe they're some kind of communal. Maybe they're communalist. Maybe
So that is something I'm going to have to think about as far as for each of the different regions and peoples, because I definitely think that there's the possibility of doing some interesting things. Everybody in D&D, I feel like one of the tropes is very much like everybody is this feudalist society. Everything is a kingdom and it's ruled by a man, and like so all of these various societal norms or whatever you want to call it, are existing in D&D, and I feel like it's a very, very easy way to add flavor is to change those things.
I think it's interesting too, because you get this sort of weird feudalism where you have feudalism without any of the responsibilities, right? So like you just have like, I don't know, a king, but then you don't actually have serfs, and you don't have the idea that there are responsibilities that go up and down. And so you end up having this weird thing, you have these weird figureheads without any kind of social structure, which then I think is a loss of some opportunities, right? It's interesting to think what would happen. I mean, especially since we had you had elected sort of doges in like Italy, right? I mean, because basically not all feudalism was England and France. Like there were
Yeah.
other
England was
models.
its own particular brand of feudalism, which resulted in several people getting beheaded. So
multiple
yeah.
times.
Multiple times they try. Like we're gonna have a elected. No, they're just a king now.
Salixon said something. I hate monocultures pretty much the same level as I hate racial languages. That brings me to racial languages should not be a thing.
Oh, but what about alignment languages? From AD&D First Edition.
Let me make this clear. Alignment isn't a thing.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say that. That's all.
Alignment is dumb.
There are some class races too. That's there's druidic is like there's I think that's the only one I know
class
of.
languages.
Class languages, yeah. Sorry, not races, languages.
I do feel like those make more sense. Those are occupation specific.
Yeah.
In various ways.
Yeah.
Like there are certain ones that I feel like make sense, but overall Elven probably shouldn't be a thing.
Are you-
like this region should be a dialect.
Are you is that so instead are you going to potentially replace some of that with regional dialects?
I think so, yeah.
Ooh, I had a question. I just thought about this. About your underground dwarven kingdom. Empire. Thing. State, civilization. Might there be might gnomes also live there? Like might that not be a mono-racial state? Might there also be other
Possibly. I am still hung up on tinker gnomes from the old Dragonlance Cran. Tinker gnomes always fascinated me, but I don't know that they have a place in my world as tinker gnomes. So I don't know. That's a maybe, but there's why stop at gnomes? Like there's a bunch of different subterranean type species that could very well fit in there.
So
Mentioned that everyone was familiar with dwarven and elven culture, meaning there's loads of contact between them and humans, so they're probably spread throughout society and not monoculture. Does that make sense?
I think there's variation with that. Just because you know about it doesn't mean you've had a lot of contact with it. Like, I know things about countries that I've never been to because I've learned about them. So how I know them is sort of variable.
And I think that that everybody knows is not true.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are well traveled, yes,
yeah.
you know. If you are not, no, you probably
Yeah.
don't, unless there's a dwarf in the town or whatever.
But I think it's that you're more likely to know than not know, or at least know that it's. I think there are going to be different reactions to people than if we suddenly transplanted a species of monogendered dwarf or agendered dwarves into Earth. Like the way that we would deal with it is going to look very different than the way they would deal with it in this setting. So there's a couple of questions on here. One of the things you're going to need to think about, and this might be something you find getting input from the players, is knowing that you've got these concepts of elves and dwarves. What do they look like in the area you're running in your campaign, and you need kind of some detail about that, and then a little bit of detail on how those might compare to overall dwarves and elves within the world. And it can just be probably to start with, it can be as simple as, this is very much this, like, other dwarves and elves will work the same way, or almost the same way, or are completely different. Like, you can basically just know, like, comparatively, is it going to look the same or not the same? And that's, I think, from our species section, that's kind of like the main thing. And that ties into a little bit of how species relate to geography. If they're less inclined to be monoculture, then are they physically located in the same place, or are they kind of mixed in as much as you would say? But that, I think, you answer when you figure out what they look like in your campaign area. Cool. Let's talk about magic. Magic.
I should point out, half the time that Lauren is talking, I'm not actually paying attention because I'm worrying about running the stream.
That's fine. That's why I'm
making
making
sure
notes
that we're
for her.
reading. So yeah, sorry.
No, that's
Will elves look like what D&D's elves look like, or will you change what they look like?
Why would I change what elves look like? We're perfect.
No, I just
I'm
mean,
kidding.
because D&D elves look like humans with slightly pointy ears and are slightly shorter. And that's different than, say, different other sort of images of elves.
I am tending towards something very, very fairly in line with D&D's overall perception. I tend to think that I'm trying to think of how to word it. Like, it's probably going to be a little more elves being a bit thinner and more lithe and less voluptuous and like things like that than say humans, but somewhat more pointy features overall and that sort of a line, but pretty much on par with D&D's conception of it.
Cool.
And that goes for all of the different species.
With magic, that's one of the things that you were also talking about, like the kind of the Fey-punk concept that also magic is used for more mundane sort of uses, and you're running that through like prestidigitation, which you have decided is the best spell, and I still think Speak with Animals is best. Followed closely by Speak with Plants.
Most useful versus most fun.
Fair.
Well, even then, prestidigitation, there's so much fun you could have with that.
Worst spell? Time Stop. Because in the high-level magic user stops time, deals with all the problems, unstops time, and the rest of the players are like, well, that was cool.
So, interestingly enough, I don't know if we touched on this before, but there is a city in my campaign world there's this dome over it where time does not flow within.
Oh, wow.
Nobody knows why, myself included.
In this campaign, or... Sorry, I missed the context.
I don't know that they're going to go there, but in this world, yeah, that there's a city that is completely, and it was on a prominent mountain pass, and it is locked down. You can't get.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it.
So because it was in a prominent pass, like there's the campaign world, and then there's this other entire area that can no longer be accessed reasonably.
Ooh.
Because the mountains are nigh on unpassable. Even with magic, it's a very, very treacherous journey. And and going under, it's a massive, it's a really big tunnel. So,
I like it.
Quasi, the short answer to your question is yes, you can say no to that. Apparently, Cortana thought I asked it a question. No, Cortana, I did not.
Bugger off, Cortana.
So when we were talking about magic, the question I wrote down is essentially who and how is magic learned and practiced? So is magic limited to certain groups of people? Is it something you're born innately with? Is it something you learn?
I feel like that's the difference between sorcerers and wizards. Sorcerers so wizards go. They say, I want to learn how to do this, and hopefully they have some degree of aptitude. I think it's a little bit of both. You have to have an inherent amount of aptitude, but most people do. It's just a matter of how much. Some people that have it will never be able to get past level 1. But, other people might have more aptitude and an easier time progressing. But sorcerers see what wizards do and they're like, I bet I could do that. And then they do. To varying degrees of aptitude.
How are wizards trained? Do they go to schools, or is it like an apprenticeship?
I would say it depends on the region because there's not huge amount of travel. The ideal is schools, but they're not grand academies necessarily. They're usually smaller. You find who you find and beg them to teach you in one way, shape, or form. The bigger towns would have small schools, but villages are not likely to. They may have a caster that you can apprentice with, things like that.
Would you imagine that sorcerers are maybe slightly less common than wizards? Or are they just simply wizards that are more self-taught?
I would say they're simply wizards that are more self-taught. And neither one is particularly common, but the closer you get to that one particular city, the more common it is.
How is this regulated? Are there wizard guilds? How do they feel about sorcerers, or is it totally fine?
I think that's going to be dependent on the country and region.
Okay.
I had envisioned there being, and I'm not sure that I like this idea, but the initial concept had been just like there is this big city and a country around it that is very focused on magic and magic as a method for improving life, there's another that would be focused on divine magic and the divine purpose and finding their purpose through religion and divinity and things like that. But I'm like, this gets a little tropey, I feel like, when you've got divine magic here and arcane magic here and then martial people over here, and it's like, it's a little too...
Would you say then...
A little too few areas of gray.
Maybe in this case, if we're sort of saying in this world, wizards are essentially people who are kind of have done a lot more study. Sorcerers are a little bit more self-taught. Clerics are people who have done study, but perhaps in a different context. Like they have simply studied in a different school that is more religiously focused. Like how do people who practice divine magic, I guess, fit in with the paradigm you have of wizards and sorcerers?
They don't. I mean, it's a different thing.
But are they the sort of people who have some sort of inherent aptitude and then went and learned magic, or is divine magic completely different from arcane magic?
Divine magic is completely different from arcane magic.
I have a question about ubiquity. We're talking about sort of like everyday magic, especially close to this big city. But I'm wondering about the experience of your everyday person not close to the big city, out in a village. So in this world, do you have, for example, either divine casters or arcane casters doing regularly rituals for crops? I mean, how present is magic in the everyday lives of people?
And again, I think that it comes down to the proximity to that particular city, and proximity to somebody that can do those services. So the people that can do that are going to be paid reasonably well for such things, and they're going to be more in demand by people that have money who are more inclined to be closer to the city. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So I have a question about this.
Now, if you can find a druid.
Well, so, that's really interesting. Like, what is the, I was thinking about levels, right? So players often want to go from 1 to 20. They do or they don't. I don't know if you ever get to 20. But in this world, do you imagine that there are not many people who are level 5 in the world? I was thinking about because maybe you have a lot of level 1 wizards who are in small villages doing small little healing things here or there, but maybe not so many people who hit level 3. So I'm just sort of wondering about in your world building, what is the distribution of levels amongst people?
I don't know how to answer that really. I mean, a lot of the core idea behind Failing Forward, as it's currently being called until we figure out a better name, is they're not the top-notch people, and they're never going to be. It's the idea that they are not the spotlight group. They're the backups, they're the bench warmers, they're optimistically. So there are plenty of people more powerful than them, but not necessarily where they are at that moment. So how I answer that any more than that, I don't know. But there are definitely more powerful people around, and people have probably heard of them versus the group that we'll have on.
A couple of questions that came up. I assume
we are running out of time. We've got about 20 minutes left.
Let's get through this stuff then.
Yeah. So
that does relate with like how, because we were talking about the connection between adventure and mundane was one of the other things, and kind of tied to this. How deep has magic acceptance gone as Griffins? Like how broad are these sort of mundane magic spells? Is it like there's a potential spell for everything, or kind of for specific things? Is it more like electricity than the internet as a technological advancement, I guess? Like how ubiquitous is this?
I
don't know.
Okay.
And I think you could have, for example, think about levels again. You could have ubiquity of really low level magic, but not ubiquity of high level magic. So that
yeah, and it's definitely something that we've talked about, and again comes back to the how close you are to that one center of magical learning. You know, the closer you are to that, the more likely you are to find the self-mixing spoons and the the ubiquity of magic in people's daily lives. And the further away you are from that, the less likely you are to see it. But that doesn't mean that everybody has a self-mixing spoon.
So related to arcane magic and divine magic being kind of completely different, how are things like druids, warlocks? That's probably the main two other caster classes.
Well, warlocks, I'm pretty sure by definition of their class, they're pulling their magic from a non-divine source. So it's essentially a powerful entity teaching them instead of a school teaching them, and in exchange for like their soul or something. I don't actually know that much about warlocks, but that's what I'm rolling with. So, and then druids are probably pulling it from the Feywild in some way, shape, or form.
I think warlocks have to give up their social security number. I think it's the social security number that you have to give up.
And mother's maiden name.
Yeah, and mother's maiden name, yeah.
Obviously, yeah.
And they always call you on the phone, and they're like, hey, I'm actually also a prince from my country, and if you just give me all of this stuff, that's...
With magic, then, what's kind of your source of magic? For divine magic, it's obviously coming from the kind of divine. You've got the Feywild as one of the possibilities. Where are you thinking of this source for arcane magic, or is that something people just don't know and they just sort of accept it?
I think the common person doesn't necessarily know, and I think that is something that I don't really want to reveal on camera. And I'm not totally sure about it, but I have some ideas, and they're all kind of like, yeah, sure, somebody probably knows, but they're not sharing that info publicly.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, religion, real fast. Are you going to stick with the D&D pantheon?
No, per your advice, I think that it'll be a good way to flavor it, even if I just rename them all. But I haven't delved into what exactly that's going to mean. But there will be a pastry deity.
Oh, nice.
Because that is a thing.
Good pastries.
Small. I think, again,
small following.
That's...
Very large people.
So you're thinking more religion, like there are probably some major deities and then a handful of just deities for whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And in order to get the high level spells, you gotta go with the big ones.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you can't have a
Deity
small...
pastries.
Yeah.
If you happen to be a baker.
Yeah.
Will you make some as needed on the fly custom spells? So for example, somebody who's a worshiper of the god of pastries might have some sort of special food-based spells that you decide at the moment.
Maybe. Generally speaking, I want to try and keep it into the realms of spells that exist, but I kind of assume that there are going to be a bunch of mundane spells that, sure, you could take your spell slot to do that, but it's, you're not going to have a lot of reason to use it. So I'm not that stressed about that. I figure, again, wiggle room with the rules, not too worried about staying completely with them, though.
Makes sense. So then creating your own pantheon, that I think is also a really great place to get player input. Like beyond, you're like, I'm going to have these 5 major, 3 major, 1 major, whatever number you want. And then like if your characters are like, I want to play a religious character, then you'd be like, cool, what god do you worship? Tell me about them. And then religion's role in the society, is that something that's going to be variable based on where they are? Are there places it's going to be more prevalent? You were
either it's going to
be
based on where they are, or I'm going to have to think about it a lot more than I have already. Pastromancy, create grape.
Is this I think that D&D sort of assumes a global pantheon, right? That these gods are the gods everywhere in the world because they're objectively true, right? And that's just sort of like a cross-cultural sort of set of pantheon. Are you thinking of doing that differently? Will there be like more than one sun god or sun deity?
I would imagine that different regions might call the same god different things, but they're the same god generally. But there could be exceptions to that. There could be very, similar to how I mentioned a particular area possibly being closer to the Feywilds. Well, there are plenty of demi-planes, so maybe there are ancient, powerful beings on some demi-planes that are a little bit closer to the prime material in different areas that allow for the springing up of cults that only have power in that area, but they go outside of it and they're too far away from their deity. It's an idea.
That's a cool concept. All right, that's religion. We're gonna blast through the next part, which is geography. So you were talking about you have a major city. You've got kind of touchstones within your world. Where is, like, how localized, how big or small scale are you thinking of the region of the campaign?
I still don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna highlight this
trying
one.
to figure out how to figure that out is kind of an issue, because I don't have a lot of context for that. I don't, having not really GM'd in a very, very, very long time, and when I did, it was provided for me because I did modules. So trying to figure out, like, well, how long do I want it to take them to travel between this place and that place? I have no idea.
But it sounds like you don't want it to take place in one city.
Initially, the initial, probably the first season that what I have planned will be around this very small town.
Okay.
And that's it. But I need to figure out where that town is in relation to all of these other things that we've discussed, because it controls a lot. How close is that town to that big city with all the magic stuff? How close is it to the dwarves? Because, you know, how often it's a mining town? Are they right outside the dwarven stronghold? Are there tensions there? I don't know, and that's why I need to figure it out.
I think this one is probably then something that we should dedicate maybe next session to. Figuring out, like, having you go back and kind of make this section your homework, or make more cupcakes. I'll take either one at this point.
Or both.
Or both.
Yeah.
And then we'll make a
Goal is
cake
both.
and turn that into your geography. Put the map on it. But I think thinking about if we want to go with creating a whole map approach, if you want to create no map and sort of more vague concepts, but I think we need to create some of the geography of your world so that you can start placing these important things that you have, because you've said so many times that city really delineates a lot of that world.
Yeah.
You need to know how close it is to that. The Feywilds delineate things, so I think let's make that kind of our piece for the next session, really.
I have one piece of advice on this one.
Yeah.
If you want them to stay in this town for the first season, so for like an extended chunk of time, then I don't think the town should be close to anything too exciting, too enticing.
Yeah.
Right? Like if it's too close to that magic city, they're gonna want to go to that magic city. If it's too close to anything that's too, like if Fantasy Island is right over there, they're gonna go to Fantasy Island. So having that town be somewhat isolated, on the edges of things where things are too far away to just get there casually, and there's maybe too much excitement, but close enough where they can like start feeling the effects of some of these larger tensions, so that there'll be a move when they like there's going to be a motivation for them to start leaving, but not right away. So I think it shouldn't be a day to get to anywhere really exciting. It should be just a little bit more isolated, and maybe with a little bit of exciting unknown on one side that they might want to sort of go out, explore, come back. But going to that big major city should take them a month or so. You know what I mean? It should take them a much longer time to get there. Maybe there's a sort of a slightly larger town where they can get better gear that's, a couple of days away.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, it's about making the place where they are, where you want them to do this stuff, the shiniest and most exciting place to be, or making it too arduous to get to somewhere that might be shinier or more exciting. So I think that's probably the piece we'll do next time, is really hammering out like what the geography of this world is, so that you have enough to feel like you can start placing people. I love maps. My approach tends to be making maps, so it's been really interesting to not have one for space.
There's Green Paradox didn't put question on, but how old is the world? That is a really good question that I also need to think about, because you kind of there's like several different ways to do it. It's like, okay, there was a cataclysm is the kind of blanket, let's not worry too much about this. It was a big cataclysm, and then you have to like figure out the whys and stuff like that, but it lets you have all of these ruins strewn about everywhere. But not having that gives you the issue of, well, elves lived thousands of years. Where did they come from? Do they remember it? So that is definitely something that I need to spend some time thinking about. In I feel like in part with the geography of it, because like what nations are there now, but what nations were there before, and why are they gone?
So I will hopefully by next week be able to dig up maps that I've made for campaigns where I've actually made maps.
A thing to think about, which I won't say too much on screen, but I will say if you're doing a small mining town, what might be interesting is to have something special about that mining town. So, for example, why did people go? When I was a small child, I lived for like a year in a place called French Gulch, which is not on any maps, except it is in a map of old abandoned mining towns and ghost towns of California. And there was like, only hippies and rednecks and also like 50 people. But it's now an abandoned place where only hippies went. But it was important because during the mining boom, there was gold there. Or maybe tin, I don't know, there was stuff there. But so maybe you're in this little place, but I think it's a nice touch to have something special about that place. That, and we can talk about those things later off camera, but that can then be later give them momentum either to move out with this special thing or people moving in. So there's a thing that can later open up the world because they have something special in this small little town.
And that also ties in with like, why are the plot things happening in this town? What makes these people be here to do the things that they're doing? And yeah, like there's also the geography piece. Like if it's a mining town, that probably means it's going to be near stuff to mine.
Ifrithiel says, well, Anna, when a mommy elf and a mommy elf love each other very much. How to influence the economy? Well, we're not going to...
Economy is a whole other thing. I think Griffin's point, though, of like communication as well and distance and travel, that is something that ties into the geography, but also to the technology, and that ties into how distant they are from that city, right? I imagine travel between places that are closer to that city is going to be much faster. Communication will be more efficient than out in the boonies with...
Also resources, right? So many conflicts that we have in world happen around resources. And I think that thinking about what the resources are and what those tensions might be would be really interesting. So I was thinking, for example, in some game systems, GURPS is one of them, but some other ones as well, have this idea that magic, thinking about the source of magic, is actually geographically located, that there's energy, right? So that there are mana levels, right?
Ley lines sort of concepts.
Ley lines, right? Or in Castle Falkenstein, there's just a given amount of magic in any given area, and when magic users use it, they deplete it and it comes back slowly. So maybe your magic city happens to be located at a place of great magical resources.
No comment on that issue.
No comment. But that means, what does that mean for other places that are not that magic space? So there could be tensions over not just gold, but also ley lines, ambient magical energy, divine spaces. I think about some places have been thought to be especially divinely important in terms of energy through often places around rivers, because that's where you want to build your cities, where there are rivers, where there's water. But like thinking about what kinds of resources, not only just sort of mundane, but also mystical or magical, can be things that can set up for your world building really interesting tensions that then can help motivate sort of plot and excitement.
Nom 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 nom.
I promised there would be cupcake eating on the stream. There will be cupcake eating on the stream.
Thank you for taking that. There's a lot of hello, 16-bit Eric.
Oh, what?
Oh,
16-bit Eric, who runs who did TBD
Oh.
And
now does the Star
Shield of
Trek
Tomorrow.
show. Hi.
hey, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate those Shadowrun videos that I made. I would make them very differently now that I've played Shadowrun for 18 months. I had played Shadowrun for like 3 months when I'd done that. And then I wanted to make more. And then people asked me how to make characters, and I'm like, I didn't have to do that.
She cheated. It was fine. It's not cheating for your GM. It's not cheating
You know
for your
what's
GM.
really fun is making Shadowrun characters without an XP or karma budget or money budget, and you're just like, I'm gonna throw money at them and karma and all of those things. So thank you for the compliment.
Oh,
and welcome here.
16-bit Eric, love Shield of Tomorrow. It is so excellent.
I'm assuming that because 16-bit Eric used to be 8-bit, but then time progressed.
Oh,
and
yeah, that's fair.
so I'm assuming that's the same 16-bit Eric, but I could be wrong.
Maybe like it becomes.
Regardless, hello. We're glad you appreciated her videos.
But yeah, I like resources are another interesting thing to think about in a world because it's a source of conflicts. But I think like anything that is a source of potential conflicts, like knowing, and we can talk about like once we have some of the bigger things, we can start thinking about like giving some more information about this town, especially if you think that it's somewhere they're going to want to be for a while. Having some hooks and things of things that those players are going to be interested in and want to invest in are good to kind of have in your back pocket to pull out in case you need them. I think there's also one of the things for me is like there's nothing wrong with establishing something about your world that you never tell your players about and then completely scrapping it because it is no longer relevant. And you're like, yeah, no, don't need that anymore. That doesn't exist.
Oh, also as inspiration, I would highly recommend for city-based groups like this, something like, for example, the soap opera EastEnders, the British soap opera, because that is all about one little hothouse place. And like, I find a daily soap is so good for RPG inspirations, because you're like, okay, so you probably want a town gossip. All right, you're going to want to watch, like, there's a ways which you get a lot of really interesting tensions that are on a small scale, because I think people on RPGs often think really big scale, like, oh, well, first we have to have a dimensional threat where demons from another dimension will come and destroy the whole wide world. Maybe not so great in the beginning. And so like a really good daytime soap can give a lot of really great inspiration about how to be invested in sort of small tensions, like somebody's child went missing, someone's having an affair with the mayor. And these things can sort of bring your players in a way that, especially if you don't want them to be murder hobos, can get them attached and bring up really cool things. Daytime soaps.
Sure. I will watch daytime soaps with all of my free time. No, actually, funny thing. Thursdays I spend catching up on Critical Role that I wasn't able to finish because I usually stop around the break and go to bed because I'm tired at that point. And then the rest of the day, catching up on Shield of Tomorrow.
Nice.
Like legit. I'm
yeah.
catching up on Shield of Tomorrow. Very, very slowly. But yeah, because I started at the beginning like a month ago. But yeah.
Oh.
So
I love that cast.
Sorry, no time for
it's fine
for soap operas.
Jeez.
I don't know what you're doing with all your time.
I think that you've got, especially as we do shows on Twitch, like I think that looking towards what works on regular television is an important thing to consider, you know? So, yeah.
And I actually think daytime soaps are an underappreciated means, I think a lot of, I don't think that film and RPGs are the same, and it's not really great to try to match them, but what's great about a daytime soap is that those things last for 40 years, and they are these sort of things that model they're a bit closer to what an RPG is like, in that you have regular characters that are going through things, you're dealing with their personal lives, larger stories, and you have to weave in sort of multiple stories over time in a way that soaps do really, really well, and that sort of film and books don't necessarily do. And so I think that soaps are an underutilized inspiration for RPGs, for plotting purposes, especially if you're streaming, because they do A, B, and C.
That's true. They do a lot of plot lines.
Yep.
And it's certainly something that your average D&D player isn't going to be like, I'm going to get inspiration from soap operas.
The days of our lives.
Yeah, no, I
I
can see
watched
that.
Neighbors.
You're going
Neighbors.
to avoid a lot of the usual tropes that you would from watching Lord of the Rings for the
Yeah.
20th time, or Game of Thrones again, or what have you.
It is one of the reasons I like, there's nothing wrong with pulling in ideas from an unrelated genre.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's core about daytime soaps interesting is the tension between big families, right? So if you're thinking, who are the big
And
families?
that's time.
Oh no! Who are the big families in
It
your,
really
in your
is,
town?
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should wrap up.
yeah. Thank you so much for guesting.
Yes,
today.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Font of knowledge.
Oh, I'm just here for the cupcakes. That's why I changed my name to Mimosa Cupcake.
And thank you very much for teaching me how to do better.
We're gonna make a map next week. Or several maps, or no maps.
Can I crowdsource it?
I'm gonna come up, we're gonna have activities, I think. Maybe. We'll see what happens. I've got some ideas.
Can we cut out construction paper for little trees and little mountains and stuff?
If you want to if I can find my construction paper by next week.
I kind of want to make a map that way now.
Oh.
It'll be good.
I have ideas.
It'll be
I
good.
will bring colored pencils and other tools and maps that I have made. And that will be next week. So yes, join us next week for talking about building maps. And I want to try and come up with more than one way to build a map so that we can have actual activities that you can follow along with at home.
I want to point out to my mods who demand that Trooper comes back to discuss soap operas that Trooper himself does broadcast.
Yes.
I do.
Where else can you be found?
Oh, well, I can be found on my own channel, Trooper SJP, on the Twitch.
The Twitch.
That Twitch, not the other one, but the Twitch. And I stream on Thursdays and Saturdays, usually story-based games that will cause us lots of consternation about what should we do, and most of the time I'm playing games that are old that all of my chat knows exactly what happens, but I don't, and they're like,
Perfect.
you
That's
don't know
always
what will
fun.
happen, and then it's exciting.
You're gonna have to just type the link out. We haven't made that command yet.
It is fine, and I will be streaming some tabletop as soon as all the scheduling comes together.
That's awesome. And you have a Twitter as well if they
Oh,
want to tweet questions at you.
Yes, my Twitter is the Academic Foxhole.
That sounds perfect.
Thank you, Paladin, for getting that link in there.
So yes, and you can also be found occasionally in my chats communities, so that's wonderful.
Oh yes, and because I get to mod for the Legion, and I'm a brand new mod for the Geek Space, and that is very exciting.
All you space cadets. Fear his sword.
My
they
sword is right
laser
here.
swords?
It's fancy.
Oh. I was like, are they laser swords if you're space cadets? But never mind.
Ooh.
Laser rapier.
I believe it's called a light rapier.
What?
No, wait, no, because it's light. No, okay, you're right. You were
Yeah.
right. Laser
Yeah.
rapier.
Or just
You're
a
right.
mono
Sorry, my bad.
monofilament blade. I don't know.
Yeah.
All the kind of strange.
Yeah. But it glows.
It's
The important
got
part
nail
is it
wire in
glows
it.
and it cuts through everything. Okay, we're done here.
super bad for stealth though, but I mean it's fine.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
But wait, who are you?
Oh, I'm Random Tuesday. You can catch me here on the Geek Space behind the screens. Apparently, actually, today I'm behind the screens. And I will be on High School Royale next, which will be happening in about 3 hours. I had to look at the time and do some quick math. Which is GM'd by the fabulous Jackie Dash. I am playing Kenna, hashtag not a knife girl. And I will also be running Friday nights right click here on the Geek Space, and that's at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Friday. So you should check both of those shows out here, as well as Anna Geeks, who's amazing. And you can find her at twitch.tv/AnnaGeeks. There's only one S in that. And she is another fabulous streamer, runner of the Geek Space, and just amazing all-around person. So we will see you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all of the donations, and check out our Patreon.